For the remainder of this weekend, let's consider this room our temple. For we are investing it with a great deal of Shakti and love. When you come in here, come in quietly. Begin to honor the space. Tomorrow morning, the incredible Hanuman, which is already, Hanuman has already gone into, so it is quite living, will be hung on the wall over there, just at kissable height, so that you can all share in investing it with the proper amount of love. And then it will be hung on the wall of the little Hanuman temple we will have in New York. For it's really a thing of great beauty. There has been a very large amount of input today already. For some of you who already have a deep philosophical structure of what this is all about, it's all second nature to you. For others, you are totally confused. Happy, feeling a sense of well-being, perhaps, but confused. That's okay. For I've said before, and I'll say again, the forms are not what it's about. What you are receiving this weekend, and I think you're beginning to understand what I'm talking about, you are receiving a transmission of the living spirit through a lineage. And you don't have to know all the words to receive the transmission, by any means. Often when you're in India, you can go to a wang, a Tibetan wang, where for 8 or 9 days there will be sutras recited. You will not understand a word of it, but you still receive the transmission. For as I said earlier today, we are beginning now to acknowledge realities other than that which is comfortable to the rational mind. And Hanuman is certainly a beginning of that. This morning, when we were out on the lawn doing the breathing, we went up over our heads, came back down into our heart. Up over the head, back down into the heart. If you wish, we went close into the quiet, impersonal presence of God. We came back into our emotional involvement with humanity. Now that is a pattern of this lineage. And that's why Hanuman is characterized as kneeling and is represented as a servant of Ram, a servant of God. For once a being has worked out their individual karma, his or her individual karma, by surrendering into God, you come to a point where you, now I'm not talking about your body is merely your package, but you, the wires that attach you to this plane are so subtle that with one snip, you go into God. You merge back into that which is without form. You do. And what is left behind is the residue of the package. Your body's left behind, and your astral bodies all dissolve, and you are slowly, your physical body disintegrates, goes back into dust, into earth. You leave. Most beings, when they get to that point, recognize a choice. The choice is, at that point, of going into not the samadhis that you go into prior to that, where your breath stops, your body becomes stiff, and you go out of your body. Those are different levels of samadhi. There are even samadhis where your body doesn't stiffen. But there is a choice of going into what's called Maha Samadhi, which is where you indeed leave your body behind and merge back into God. Now you understand, most people that die don't have this option because they still have a lot of personal karma. And that personal karma, it's like you are say this flower with a soul. It has connected with it a lot of what would be called, I don't know what you want to call them. There are names in Buddhism, Hinduism, everything for it. Sanskaras, they're predisposing tendencies, you might call it. It's like a DNA code. It's clingy stuff. It's a set of desires that are still lurking in you. And this soul demands a form again to keep working out these desires. The desires keep projecting out a form. They keep creating form. The form may not be on the physical plane like this. You may end up in heaven. That would be nice. But after so many 100 years or 1,000 years, because time is different on each of these planes, it's still time, but it's different units of time. You use up that karma, and you leave that plane. You may just discorporate. You may not die because you don't die on those planes. And then you are still an entity with certain karma, and you might come back then and take another human birth. But at some point in your evolution, you come to the point where the veil is very thin because the desires, the personal desires, are pretty well gone. There's nothing much you want. You're not attached to being in any particular form in heaven or earth. Everything is what it is, and you can acknowledge it. So, yes, you're right here. The only pull that is there now is the pull to merge back into God, which is like the pull in sex after a long foreplay, the pull for the orgasm. And as you approach that moment, your third eye is wide open, your eye be single, your being be full of light. You see the entire scene. You understand karma. You understand the laws. You understand the divine law of the universe. You understand all the Buddha fields. You understand the whole way of sanskara. You are wisdom at that moment. You see that all form is suffering. You see that anything in time has suffering in it. You see just what Buddha saw before he enunciated the Four Noble Truths. That moment you have choice. Choice to give up the form, go into the formless, or choice to play in the formless but come back into the form. Why would you come back into the form? It's what in Tibetan Buddhism is called the Bodhisattva vow. Why would you come back into the form? Not because of your personal karma anymore. That's all over. There's nothing in you pulling. You don't want anything. You even see the perfection of the universe. You see the perfection of God's work. You even see that the suffering itself, because you began to see that the suffering was what awakened you, you begin to see that the suffering is grace, even though most people don't see it because they're too deep in the illusion. Were there no need for the suffering, there would be no need for this world, and none of us would be on this plane at all. Wouldn't exist. This exists because of the karmic needs of the people on it. What you experience is collective karma. You identify with the suffering of all sentient beings. And that identification can keep you in form. At that point, your form is no longer personal. You are at that moment an instrument of God. You are at that moment, just as Buddha was when he returned from his enlightenment, you are an instrument of the Dharma. You are a statement which will enlighten those that are ready to be enlightened. That is your only function. It's the only reason you're on earth. The only reason you're here at all. For you're not going to get your rushes here, since your rushes come from orgasm with the infinite. And when you've had a lover like that, there's nothing in the world that has much pull. You can enjoy it all, but you have the choice to go into God. You have the choice to have it all. Why take little bits of it? See, at this point, you come here, the setting is beautiful, you will have some deep meditations, but then the pull of the world will be strong, and it'll pull you back, and you'll have to make an effort to meditate. When those feet shift, when the weight shifts, you just sit in meditation, and then you think, oh, now I have to leave this to go into form. And the weight has shifted. It's like getting up out of a bed where you're all cuddly on a cold morning to go and light the fire, or let the dog out, or the cat in, or change the baby, or go to work. When this balance of feet shifts, when you start to awaken, it dawns on you that the whole game is perfect. The whole game is perfect, including all the shit you've been through. It's all perfect. Even the way man's will screws it all up. It's still all, there's perfection in it. There is a tendency to get enamored of the impersonal, the cold impersonal, the beauty of it all, the beauty of the Leela. And you keep saying, but it's all an illusion anyway. What are we getting so upset about? Nothing to do, it's all an illusion. You get so fascinated with God, with enlightenment, with the wisdom of the ages. And in your zeal to do that, it's very easy to forget humanity, to forget politics, to forget human concerns, to forget human suffering, to overlook the daily stuff around you. The image I've used in lectures that I got from my teacher, you get so busy looking at the snow, the pure white snow and the peaks of the Himalayas, because for so many incarnations you've been looking out and down, and you finally look up and it's so beautiful. You've never been identified with so much beauty in your life that you'd rather not have to look back down and see that right beneath your feet is blood on the snow, which is the blood from the heart of Jesus. It's the blood of the suffering of form. It's the pull of humanity. It's the pull of humanity. Now, does it seem premature that I'm talking about this to you? After all, most of you are much more pulled by humanity than you are by God. You are much more concerned with the crying of your child, or the hurt of the puppy dog, or the inequality in politics, or the way in which blacks are treated, or the way in which the religious struggles of peoples. Why am I talking to you about the pull of humanity? That's your problem. See, some of you have the disquieting feeling, I've got to be careful, because all these people that go to God, they forget about the world. And what about politics? And what about economics? And what about social responsibility? I mean, am I really playing my part in the dance? As you go up, if you're going up in perfection, as you go up, you keep looking down as well as up. You have one eye going up and one eye going down. One eye is in the world and one eye is in God. If both eyes are in the world, you have nothing to offer mankind except more suffering. because you are lost in the illusion. If both eyes are on God, you've forgotten about the world and you couldn't care less, so you don't offer them anything anyway. The predicament is that when you start this journey, you get a little bit of clarity and you want to rush and use it for other people, to help your family, your friends, others who are suffering. But that desire is not one that is without attachment. It is an attached desire. It has to do with the guilt that maybe you got something special. It has to do with your attachment to their suffering. And the motivation for why you're doing that does not liberate those people. What most of you will do to help other human beings will help them on one level, on the physical level. If you feed somebody and fill their belly, you help them. If you give them clothing, if you help them raise food, if you help them with medical things, if you help them because they're hurt, if you help them because they're lost, you have helped them on the physical plane, but your motivation for helping them may well have been such that though you helped them on one plane, you perpetuated the illusion of their separateness and thus their suffering. To know that does not drive you to not serve, but it drives you to remember and serve humanity as an exercise and a vehicle for becoming enlightened. For ultimately, the only thing that frees another being is a free being. As Ramakrishna said, if you are in quicksand, you cannot free another from quicksand. I'm an example of that. I'm not a fully realized being. And quite honestly, it's very difficult for me to leave my meditations with God to come and do this. This is my work. This is humanity. This is the pull. I have to do this. This is part of my being. This is my route to God. I've got to do this. But as I do it, I am only doing it as an exercise for my own liberation, because if I am doing it motivated to helping you as my motivation, I am attached to me being a helper and you being that which is helped, and I am actually pushing you away in the way I'm helping you as somebody who needs to be helped. And in the long run, I am perpetuating your illusion of separateness. That's a very subtle point, and it may be just too much for you to grasp. Do any of you hear what I'm talking about? And what I just said is part of the way, in words, that you are protected from that illusion that I still retain. Because I'm telling you, there it exists. But more directly what's doing it is that in my heart and my being, my work is with God, and you are the instruments and the vehicles of my coming to God. And because of that, you are protected. I can't explain to you the subtlety of the way this works, because it's an astral-type subtlety, but you are totally protected from being hurt in the spiritual sense by my being, because of the purity of my commitment to God. Maharaj-ji in India once said, I said, Maharaj, you can't send me back to America because I'm so impure, and I don't mind my own karma, but I can't stand laying karma on other people. And Maharaj-ji said, Ramdas could not hurt anybody in America. And the not hurting anybody comes not because everything I say is totally the statement of God, but because of my motivation in being with you. For I don't, in truth, want power over you. I don't want to control you. I don't want you to worship me. I don't want to collect you. I don't need you. There is no rush that you give me that is anywhere near 1/1000th what I can get from sitting down in front of my puja table and being in love with God. Not 1/1000th of it. It is that preoccupation with God in me that is what liberates you through whatever it is that I do with you. It's because I don't want you and I don't need you. For if there was the least vibration in me of wanting you or needing you, that would feed your paranoia. It would feed the place in you that is looking, because of your long history of being had, looking for the way in which you are being conned or exploited this round. Most of you, since you were little children, closed off from trusting other human beings because everybody wanted something. They wanted your body, they wanted your soul, they wanted your mind, they wanted your money, they wanted your power, they wanted something. They wanted your adoration, your adulation, they wanted something. And that closed offness closes you off not only from your fellow man, it closes you off from the flow of the universe. It closes you off from God. You can't afford the paranoia that most of you have lived with most of your life. The funny thing is you don't need it either, because you aren't as vulnerable as you thought you were. As you begin to recognize who you are, as I'm trying to show you who you are is not vulnerable to the human foibles. Nobody can do anything to your soul that way. They can screw around with your body and your mind, but you aren't as vulnerable as you think you are. And before you will know God, you will be able to stand naked and wide open, with heart wide open, as all of the possible horror shows of humanity surround you and pour on you and through you. You will be able to look at disaster, at starvation, at flood, at horror, at death of beloveds. You will be able to look at violence, at ugliness, whether it's done to you or another, with your heart wide open, with blood pouring out of it upon the snow. And at the same moment, that other eye is looking up and sees the total perfection of the dance, and you will have perfect equanimity. Most of you now, when it gets ugly, you turn your heart off. You get cold, you go into your mind in order to protect yourself because you feel so vulnerable. And most marriages are battles of who's hurting who. When you understand what this dance is, nobody can hurt anyone else. If you come on to me and you're ugly and angry and violent, that's your karma. If I react to it, that's my karma. And my work is on myself, not on you. And if I'm sitting with a partner who is a shrew and a bitch, that is her karma. If I get stuck in it, that's my karma. And when I know I'm going to God, I eat that bitchiness. That is known as consuming the mother. What I was talking about at supper time. See, the day has some method in its madness. This is very heavy stuff. I really have to give it in very small doses because this is like baklava. You know, it's very thick and rich and you get nauseous if you eat too much. Right? It's funny to run these workshop things, you know, because I know that about a 15-minute message is really about the capacity, when it's dense, of human consciousness. But then we have 24 hours a day. And it's very delicate to design a dance that allows for the density of this transmission. And if we went on for a month, we would get so there would be 15-minute messages about 3 times a day, and all the rest would be meditation. That's all you really need. But you don't know you need that yet. See? So I have to keep doing this stuff because you think you need it. You got to understand how humorous the whole bizarre predicament is we're all caught in. You see, up to a year and a half ago, I had been trained in many ways. I had a guru. My guru left his body. I was honored and respected as a spiritual teacher in America. I had my gig down pretty cool. People loved me, respected me, honored me. I could earn a living. Right? Be here now is Maharaj-ji's gift to everybody through me. I could have ridden that for this lifetime. And I have a great love of humanity. But it wasn't pure. Because the balance wasn't even, because I wasn't deep enough in God. I knew of God, and I wanted to want it, but I didn't really want it that bad. But then I began to become horrified by the way in which I was perpetuating illusion. And when that despair got deep enough, even though everybody around me was reassuring me that I was doing great things for everybody, but I couldn't live with myself, that was the point that the next teaching became available to me. And I was brought to the teachings that I am now receiving. I described in the lecture I believe I gave in Gainesville last spring, which some of you were at, the way in which I came to this present teaching. The reason I must tell you of it now is because I must have you understand, if you're receiving the transmission of this lineage, the function and the role of what is called the spiritual hierarchy. It was a year ago last July. I had finished teaching at the Naropa Institute in Boulder. I was depressed and determined to stop teaching and seek further training. I didn't know how to do that because I had already up-leveled every scene in America, one way or another. Trungpa had been my last hope, and he turned out not to be pure enough. I didn't know where to go. I decided to return to India to once again seek some spiritual guidance. I was in a motel in Pennsylvania. The electricity went out. I was watching television. I meditated. I was forced to meditate. I had nothing else to do, and it was too early to go to sleep. I meditated, and in the middle of the meditation, Maharaj-ji came to me, and he said to me, "You don't have to go to India. Your next teachings will be here in America." And that vision was so real and vital that at that moment I changed my plans, and I decided I would go to New Hampshire to meditate. Next day I came to New York City. I was at a chiropractor's. I was waiting for him, and there was a phone in the room, and I called a woman who has been a spiritual friend and teacher for me, and she said to me, "There is a woman you must meet in New York." I said, "I don't want to meet anybody." She said, "I think you ought to meet this woman." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to New Hampshire." And I talked to her for a few minutes, hung up, finished with the chiropractor, went to visit some friends, and in walked this woman who I'd been on the phone with again, and she says, "You really must meet this woman that lives in Brooklyn." I didn't really want to meet a woman in Brooklyn. I mean, there's just nothing in it that pulled me. But she called the woman on the phone. The woman said, "Tell him that his guru is here in my basement." And that turned the tide. And the next morning, I went out with the woman I had called to Brooklyn, and I came into this house and was taken to the basement where there was a very beautiful woman sitting with her eyes rolled up, her body stiff, no pulse, no heartbeat. I was having very, very intense reactions to her. First because of the samadhi state, which was very impressive. But then her way of being was also very impressive. She had incredibly long false eyelashes and heavy mascara, a low-cut dress. She looked like something between Sophia Loren and Anna Magnani or something like that. I mean, it's that kind of person. And she came down out of samadhi, and she looked at me, and to her side was a blanket, an empty blanket. And she said something to the effect of, "What the fuck do you want?" And this woman that had brought me there said, "Oh dear, this is Ram Dass." She said, "I don't give a damn who it is." She says, "Does that dirty old man belong to you? Get him the hell out of here." You see, God has a great sense of humor, and you learn. After all, when I met Maharaj-ji, who has affected literally millions of people now through Be Here Now and through me and all the people that came in contact with him, he was this funny old man with no teeth sitting on a blanket in the mountains of the Himalayas. I mean, there I was, an ex-Harvard professor, big deal from the West, and there was this simple little man. And he was vast, but he was little, physically little, I guess. I always saw him as about 9 feet tall, but I guess he was little. And now, again, I'm meeting this completely unbelievable situation. But what I say this afternoon about we learn to be able to handle dissonance, handle situations where it doesn't quite fit in. I had no model at all of a spiritual teacher that could teach me anything that would have false eyelashes and mascara. I want you to know right off that I just don't have those kind of models. I mean, I'm just much too middle class for that. My middle class gurus all either are Tibetan or Indian, and they all look wise, and none of them have long beards, and they say wise things, not like, what the fuck do you want? That is just not my idea of a guru. So I looked over and I didn't see anything on the blanket. So I said, well, I don't know whether that's my guru or not. At which point she went into another state of consciousness, and Maharaj-ji started to speak through her. And he proceeded to discuss with me a number of things that he and I had talked about in India before he left his body, things about the temple and the temple trust and various little sort of incidental things about the life in India at the temple that we would relate to each other over, none of which I would particularly ever talk about in the West, and there would be no reason for this woman to know any of that stuff. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, there was no doubt in my mind that Maharaj-ji's consciousness was in this space with me. Well, he wouldn't leave her house. And I went to New Hampshire to try to get away from this situation, but I was pretty hooked. And I came back once in October and once in November, and then in December I moved to New York, and I just sort of surrendered to the whole business. And that was just a year ago. And since that time, I have been in full-time training by Maharaj-ji, this woman, and numerous other beings on other planes of existence, many of whom speak through her or are available for her to teach from. Here is a woman who has a 10th grade public school education, who teaches me things from the Kabbalah, from geometry, recites hour upon hour of poetry, of high, beautiful poetry, mystic poetry, who speaks other languages fluently, who knows my mind inside out. She's not a public teacher. She's not available to you. She has a husband and a family, and they are not the least bit interested in all of this business, which makes it very difficult for her. And in fact, were she to become public, it would destroy her family life and her family, so that she must be protected. In the past year, there has really been no place I have been and nobody I have met that she has not known about. If I were to speak to her on the phone and mention any one of you, can you tell me about this fellow that I saw down in Gainesville? I'll give you an example. I told this example before. It's a very far-out example. I know that I told it when I told it before. She said to me once, "You're going to go on a trip now down south." This was last year, last when I came down through here. She said, "You're going to meet a fat lady. Give her a hug for me." So I promptly forgot this instruction. And I went through Columbia, South Carolina, Durham. I think I might have been Gainesville on that trip, I'm not sure. And I was in Durham giving a lecture in the hall at the University of North Carolina, Duke. And in the second row, there was a group of middle-aged people, and there was one woman who had very fat arms. She was full, very jovial woman. She was laughing, and everything I said in the lecture, she'd laugh at. She wasn't laughing at me, she was laughing with me, and it blew my mind because she was so, I couldn't figure out what she was or who she was, and I was fascinated by her. I remember as I lectured, my consciousness kept being pulled by this woman, but I had forgotten the instruction. And I went back to New York, and the first thing that Joya said to me was, "Did you hug the lady for me?" I said, "What lady?" She said, "I told you meet a fat lady and you would hug her." I said, "Oh, I forgot." I said, "I don't think I met." She says, "You know, she was the one in the third row down in North Carolina." I said, "Oh, that one." She said, "Yeah," she said, "she was your mother in a previous incarnation. But she said, you'll meet her again, don't worry." Okay. How many levels you want? That's the way it is. And when you have no space to hide in, you begin to understand the difficulty of surrender. When your mind becomes wide open to another human being, when there is nowhere to hide at all, nowhere to hold on to your arrogance, your specialness, your false pride, your self-pity, your unworthiness. Like I have models of how life should be lived by reasonable people. Right? I have reasonable models. Like a reasonable model is, if you want to be rested for a full day's work, you should go to bed, say, at 11 o'clock and get like 6-7 hours sleep. That's a model I have. It comes out of Western medicine. Seems like a reasonable model, doesn't it? So at around 11 o'clock, I'd go to bed. At around 11:15, the phone would ring, which is just as you're going to sleep. And it would be Joya. Now is my predicament. Here is the spiritual teacher, my source, calling me, but it's 11:15. She could have called me at 8, but she didn't. She called me at 11:15. And there is that little irritation in me, more than a little irritation, like, what the hell, do you have to bother me now? I mean, couldn't we do it tomorrow or something like that? Especially because at that point she will be in a very high plane of consciousness, so the words are coming out very slow. Okay? Very, very slow. So there is an exasperating, frustrating, because a sentence may take that long when it could have taken that long, and this is the time you could have been sleeping, because otherwise you'll be a wreck tomorrow. Right? So you'd feel frustration and anger. And she'd go on and on and on talking until you understood what the game was. The game was that she was going to talk indefinitely until you gave up the anger and frustration. Okay? And the minute you surrendered, okay, talk all night, I don't give a damn. The hell with it. She'd say, have a good night. Now, this is very, very subtle teaching. It seems like total Mickey Mouse stuff. But it is the most incredibly subtle kind of process of cleaning away the stuff in you, the models and molds you have of who you are and what you're about that keep closing you down and closing you down. It's like I walked in and I met one of us who I've known for many years, and he said, this is going fine, but he said, I've got this stomach problem and all this stuff and fasting because my metabolism, and he gave me a whole model of who he thinks he is. And there is a certain humor in that from my point of view, because I will be having a raging fever and a virus, and I'll have every good grounds for doing what I love to do, which is curl up in bed with hot lemonade and be sick. Because that was the thing you always got your love from your mother. I always did. I don't know about you, but I always got incredible love, no matter how bad I was when I was sick enough. Right? And I'd say to Joya, gee, she'd say, what do you got? I'd say, God, I feel so sick. She'd say, well, give it up. I say, you're the Divine Mother. Why don't you love me and feed me lemonade and stuff like that? And she says, just give it up. Right? And she would make me go to class, do everything just as I come to see her, just as I would regularly have to do, sickness or not, until the sickness was just going to be such a nuisance I had to give it up, because I didn't get it reinforced at all. One by one, the models and molds of who I am and how I function, slowly eaten away, slowly eaten away. I now, not here because I'm away. The mouse is away because it's away from the cat. And it doth play. But in New York City for the past 11, 12 months, at least in the past 6 months, I sleep 3 hours a night. Because she keeps me going right to the end. Like at 2 in the morning, she stops. And I have to get up at 5. And I'm boxed in. There's no way I can get out of it. I've got to either run away, but if I run, I'm running from that which is pure, but I don't want to surrender to it. You hear what the predicaments are of life? So you keep surrendering, you keep surrendering, you keep surrendering. And the more you surrender your models and your molds in your mind about what you think God is about and how it works and who you think you are and how you work, the more you are open to the flow of the universe, the closer you come into God. The reason I wanted to tell you all of this, the quality of this woman, the quality of Maharaj-ji, that was the most critical quality of both of them, was the degree of their purity of being. For I had never met beings this pure before. The last time I had ever touched that kind of purity was when I was part of a contingent from San Francisco of hippies. I was sort of the hippie from the Haight-Ashbury. And I was meeting with the Hopi elders to arrange a Hopi hippie be-in in Grand Canyon. Right? And I was the representative of the hippies, and the Hopi elders all gathered in Hota Villa in Arizona. And I remember sitting around a kitchen table with these elders, and there weren't enough chairs, so I was on the floor, so I could look under the table and over it. And under the table were all these gnarled old... The youngest of them was 68, and they went up to about 110. These lots of turquoise, but these old hands that were like roots reaching into the earth. It was an incredibly beautiful hand. And the youngster in the group, the 68-year-old one, was telling me about their predicaments with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he said, one of our young men was in an automobile accident with a car belonging to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs car was over the yellow line, but the police the next day, they found a bottle in the gutter, and they said our young man was drinking. And then he said to me, we asked our young man, he said he was not drinking. He speak truth. And he looked at me in such a way that I knew at that moment that that was exactly the way it was. And I realized that we who live with lawyers and contracts and total distrust had lost that connection where people spoke that way with one another. They just said it the way it was. And I felt like I was connected to something very almost primordial, something that was before my own life experience. Because I come out of a family of lawyers where nobody trusts anything. And here I am with my guru in India and now with Joya, feeling again a quality of purity of being that makes, there's one thing in the world that's left that makes me cry, and that's purity. It's far out. When I see somebody purely wanting to go to God, a purity in them, I weep. I absolutely weep. I can't stand it. It's a quality in beings. It's an innocence. It's a regained innocence, and the person may have been as jaded as can be. It's most beautiful when somebody is very worldly and jaded and tough, like I am in many ways, and then opens to that purity again. That's the purity of the sweetness of God coming through a being. And that's part of the transmission, part of that transmission. For as I said earlier, what I offer you is that I don't want you and I don't need you. And that I love you independent of what you do or say. I love you allowing you the choice to go to God or not to go to God. And very rarely in your life have you ever been in this situation before with another human being. I want nothing from you. I need nothing from you. And I can love you because my love is not conditional, because I don't need anything from you. I don't need you to love me. And that space is a space that frees you from a paranoia that is so deep within you. That is a part of the transmission. And that is the transmission of being to being. We are offering each other our beings, and the forms are just the forms.